They share sacraments, saints, and a history that goes all the way back to the apostles. And yet, for almost 1,000 years, the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches have been split. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into what that divide really looks like, drawing from a source that lays out the differences from a very clear Eastern Orthodox perspective. First, we'll start by looking at the surprising amount of stuff they actually agree on. Then we'll get into what our source says is the real root of the whole disagreement. From there, we'll tackle the role of the Pope, unpack some deep theological disputes, and finally, see how all this big picture stuff plays out in the way people actually worship. Okay, so before we jump into the disagreements, I want to be clear about our source for this breakdown. It's an article from St. John the Evangelist Orthodox Church, and it outlines these differences from its point of view. And what's really interesting is that their starting point isn't conflict, but actually a place of pretty remarkable agreement. I mean, it's easy to just focus on what divides them, but when you look at what they share, it's kind of staggering. Both churches accept the first 7 ecumenical councils, the line of apostolic succession, all 7 sacraments, and the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. They even share a reverence for the saints and honor the Virgin Mary as Theotokos, the God-bearer. It's this huge common heritage that makes the differences we're about to explore just so profound. Our source uses this really powerful analogy to get its main point across. It's like the relationship between an American and a European. It argues the Catholic view is kind of like the American who sees all the surface similarities and just assumes they're basically the same. But the Orthodox view, that's the European, who is just intensely aware of all the deep historical and cultural canyons that make them fundamentally different. The takeaway here is that these aren't just minor squabbles. They go right to the very foundation of the faith. So, this brings us to what our source says is the single most important difference, the one that really underpins everything else. It's not about a specific rule or belief, it's about the very philosophy of what religious doctrine is and whether or not it can change. On the one hand, you have the Roman Catholic view. Doctrine is like a seed. It gets planted, and over time, the Holy Spirit helps it grow and mature, leading to totally new dogmas like papal infallibility. But on the other hand, you have the Orthodox view, which says, nope, the faith was delivered once, it's complete, it's unchanging, dogma doesn't grow, it just puts up a fence to protect the original faith when it's attacked. It draws a line around a mystery, but it never, ever claims to fully explain it. And that philosophical split? Well, it has a massive real-world consequence. It leads directly to probably the most visible disagreement between the two churches, the whole question of authority, and specifically the power of the Pope. This is the Catholic doctrine of papal supremacy. And what it means is that the Pope isn't just the Bishop of Rome. He's the supreme authority over the entire church. His power is universal, it's immediate, and it's over every single Christian. He is, for all intents and purposes, the physical head of the church on earth. The Orthodox Church looks at this and rejects it completely. From their perspective, as the source puts it, Christ is the one and only head of the church. He doesn't need a substitute or a vicar. They see St. Peter, who Catholics see as the first pope, not as a supreme ruler, but as the primus inter pares, the first among equals. A leader, for sure, but not an absolute monarch. Building on that idea of supremacy is papal infallibility. This is the belief that when the Pope speaks officially from the throne or ex cathedra on faith or morals, he's protected by the Holy Spirit from being wrong. Now, our source points out that this was only declared dogma in 1870, which, if you're coming from the Orthodox view of an unchanging faith, is a perfect example of a brand new doctrine. This leads to a really critical, practical problem that the source asks directly. If the Pope has supreme, infallible authority, what happens if he's wrong? I mean, who could possibly correct him? This is a huge contrast to Orthodox history, where they've had councils that actually depose their own patriarchs for heresy. Okay, so we've covered the fundamental split on doctrine and power. Now let's dive into some of the core theological ideas that flow from that divide, starting with the very nature of the Holy Trinity itself. Right at the heart of this big Trinitarian debate is this one Latin word, filioque. It just means "and the Son." Now, the original Nicene Creed, which the whole church agreed on, said the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. But later, the church in the West went and added "and the Son," which fundamentally changed the text. So the Orthodox have 3 huge objections to this. First, they say it straight up contradicts what Jesus says in the Gospel of John.
Second, they believe that making the Spirit proceed from two sources kind of demotes the Holy Spirit, knocking the whole Trinity out of balance. And third, and this is a big one for them, it was added by Rome all on its own, without an ecumenical council, which to them is a massive violation of church law.
All right, this next difference is a little bit abstract, but it is absolutely crucial, so stick with me. The Catholic tradition relies on a concept called absolute divine simplicity. Basically, it says that God's essence, who he is, and his attributes, like love or justice, are the exact same thing. He's a pure single being. The Orthodox, though, make a distinction between God's unknowable essence and his knowable energies. The energies are his actions in the world, things like grace and light and life itself.
And the source gives us this fantastic analogy to make it all make sense. Think about the sun. We can't know the essence of the sun, right? If we tried to get too close, we'd be vaporized. But we can directly experience its energies, its light, its heat, its power. For the Orthodox, that's how we relate to God. We can never fully grasp his infinite essence, but we can truly know and experience him through his divine energies.
Okay, let's bring these high-level theological ideas back down to earth and see how they actually affect the daily practice of faith, in worship, in salvation, and even in how they see figures like the Virgin Mary. A really clear example is how they view the Virgin Mary. The Catholic dogma of the Immaculate Conception says that Mary was preserved from original sin from the moment of her own conception to make her a pure vessel. The Orthodox, however, believe she was born just like every other human. They believe she was sanctified at the Annunciation, when she chose to bear Christ. And for the Orthodox, that difference is everything. Her sinless life was a profound human victory, not some pre-programmed state of being. And this quote from the 20th century St. John Maximovich just captures the Orthodox objection perfectly. He asks, if Mary was basically created unable to sin, where's the merit in that? Where's her struggle? Like he says, there is no victory without an adversary. From their point of view, the Immaculate Conception accidentally makes Mary less worthy of honor, not more, because it takes away her free and virtuous choice. And what about after we die? The Catholic Church teaches the doctrine of purgatory. It's a state where souls that are saved get purified through punishment for sins that were already forgiven. It's like a satisfaction model. The Orthodox Church rejects this completely. Instead, they teach there is a waiting time until the final judgment. They argue that God either forgives you or he punishes you. He doesn't do both. After death, all souls experience God's loving presence, but that exact same presence is pure bliss for the righteous and a purifying fire for those who aren't ready for it.
Finally, the source points to the actual lived experience of worship. It argues that the big liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s created this dramatic break with the past, changing the Mass so much that a Catholic from the 1800s might not even recognize it. In stark contrast, it holds up Orthodox worship as a model of unbroken continuity, a liturgy that connects the believer today direct to the practices of the ancient church. So as we've seen, these divisions go way deeper than clerical beards or what day you celebrate Easter. They're rooted in the very definition of truth, the structure of power, the nature of God, and the path to salvation itself. So from this Orthodox perspective, the question isn't just about how to bridge a gap, but whether two paths that are this fundamentally different can ever really lead to the same destination.